federal government says we are still on track to vaccinate every Canadian that wants a shot by September. The city is preparing to roll out 9 mass vaccination clinics to help get shots into arms across Toronto. And this comes as public health officials continue to monitor these fast-spreading variants of this virus across our city. Mayor John Tory joining us live for his weekly check-in. Good morning to you, Mayor.
Good morning, Mel.
Just getting this information now from the province saying that the first round of COVID-19 vaccinations completed now in all Ontario long-term care homes. So that is absolutely good news. So that's a very good piece of news. But now we need to expand that. We need to look at the other parts of the population. Let's look at the vaccination sites. So how were these sites determined and where they went across the city?
Well, we've had very excellent work done by a task force that I asked be established last fall before there even was a vaccine, headed up by Chief Pegg, our fire chief, who's been taking on the management of the pandemic overall with us and also this immunization effort. And we were trying to have, let's remember, the mass immunization sites we're talking about here, the 9 of them, are only a relatively small part of the whole immunization delivery system. Most people will end up getting their vaccination in a doctor's office or at a pharmacy. But for certain populations where it's easier to have them come to a mass immunization site, we've picked them just geographically across the city so they can be accessible. We've tried to make them close to sort of, concentrations of population, close to transit. And of course, the sites themselves have to be big enough to accommodate large numbers of people safely, because it isn't just a matter of saying, well, let's have a huge lineup or a crowd scene. We have to avoid that because of COVID-19. So you can see the list. It really is they're spread across the city, and they will be complemented by the pharmacies and doctors' offices and by pop-up clinics, mobile clinics, and things like that to reach vulnerable and hard-to-reach populations. Because one of the other things we have to get around is some degree of what they call vaccination hesitancy. People who are nervous about getting vaccinated or who have some hesitation for historical or other reasons about getting a needle. So that's the effort that we're making. Remember, the responsibility for this is the federal government gets the vaccine, the province distributes it and sets the rules on who gets vaccinated when, and our job is to be ready to provide some of these kinds of facilities and mobile and pop-up relationships with community organizations to provide those kinds of vaccination sites under the direction mainly of the province.
Mayor Tory, I want to get to you mentioned transit and looking at some of these sites. The federal government spending close to $15 billion on transit over the coming years. This is good news for Toronto. Obviously, we know our infrastructure has not been at the best, and we've been relying on the funding to be able to get some work done. So what is this going to mean for the immediate future and then the long term for Toronto Transit?
This really was a very big, significant announcement because for many years, people previous to me in this job and in other cities across Ontario and across Canada have asked for the federal government. Ours was the only country in the world, going back 10 years, that wasn't in some way, only industrialized country that wasn't having its federal government play some ongoing role in public transit. Now, starting with Stephen Harper and his government, they initially took some steps in this area. Now, Mr. Trudeau has really solidified the role of the federal government on a permanent, predictable basis to provide funding for transit projects in cities across Canada, but of course including Toronto. So for us, this will not only help us buy transit vehicles that we need to do to keep our fleet renewed, but it will help us with further expansion projects like, say, the Scarborough-Eglinton East LRT, which goes up through the U of T Scarborough campus and up to Malvern, or the waterfront transit, which takes an area of intensive development and provides proper transit to that area. So it'll really help us with projects like that in terms of our own expansion plan. So this is a very significant announcement, and I commend the federal government for stepping forward and saying they're going to do this and on an ongoing basis, not just once in a while.
Mayor, every Torontonian that I speak to says, okay, I'm looking forward to the eventual gradual reopening of our city on many levels. And a lot of people have the 22nd circled in their calendar. Have you heard any word that we are on track to potentially start on the 22nd, or is this date sort of a placeholder and things could change?
I would say it's more the latter, and I'm not being a pessimist in saying that. I think it's a placeholder because I think the ultimate decision on how much we reopen and when will come based on how the numbers are. And of course, it isn't just the numbers of the COVID-19, which are heading in the right direction, although they're far from as good as they were, say, last early fall. But the real, unknown in all this is the variants. And if the variants are, have been managed well and are stabilized, and people have kind of helped to do that by keeping their distance and wearing masks and so on, then the 22nd could be a significant day in terms of the beginning of a reopening. And let's remember what the provincial announcement about the 22nd said, which is that you would go back, a city like Toronto would go back to the status it had immediately before the province-wide lockdown. So we would go back to a gray designation, which really doesn't mean everything suddenly opens up.
Right.
But they have said there would be some more relaxed rules with respect to, say, a smaller retail. And I think rightly so. I think those smaller businesses were treated unfairly. And so they would have some ability to have customers inside the store and so on, which they haven't at present. The other thing we're really, really focused on, I think we all should be and will be, is keeping the schools open safely once they open. And so that's going to be number one priority, to make sure that happens so the kids can be safe and so the kids can be back at school, which I think teachers, parents, and kids all would agree is a very good thing.
Yes, next week on Tuesday. A lot of people are looking forward to that one. All right, Mayor Tory, as always, we appreciate your time, and we took a couple weeks off from it, but you know what's back?